Absolutely. I think pretty much any child, given the choice between driving to school or walking to school, will choose walking to school. It's a very different experience to be able to explore the world around you, to reflect on the nature, go through the nice park, stop for a little while to play in swings, these kinds of things. I mean, these are absolutely, I think, what most children want to do. And to kind of link back to what you're saying about it's not a war on cars, I think most parents want to do that as well. And it's not a failure on their part that they're not doing that. It's a failure on our part collectively that we're not building a transport system and a society that makes that easy. We've made it far too easy to drive. We made it far too difficult to do everything else. And that's the thing we need to change.
Hey everyone, welcome to the Active Towns channel. My name is John Simmerman, and that is Cllr James McAsh from the Southwark Borough of London. And we're going to be talking about the Streets for People initiatives that they have in their borough. And it's a fascinating discussion and really addressing some of the challenges that we all face globally of, changing the street space and how they are navigating that. But before we get to that, if you are enjoying this content here on the Active Towns channel, please consider supporting my efforts by becoming an Active Towns ambassador. Super easy to do. Just navigate over to activetowns.org, click on the support tab at the top of the page. Several different options, including becoming a Patreon supporter. Patrons do get early and ad-free access to this video content. Okay, commercial over. Let's get to it with James. Cllr James McAsh, thank you so much for joining me on the Active Towns podcast. Welcome.
Thank you so much for inviting me. It's great to be here.
I love giving my guests an opportunity to introduce themselves. So who the heck is James McAsh?
Good question. I ask myself that every day. So I am a Labour councillor. So I'm an elected municipal politician in the London Borough of Southwark. So that's a part of London. And I've been doing this for about 7 years. 4 years initially as what we call a backbench councillor, so someone who represents their patch but doesn't have any kind of borough-wide responsibilities. But in the past 3 years, it's been what is essentially a full-time role, having leadership responsibilities for parts of the council's work. Initially on land use, so regeneration and planning, and in the last 2 years on transport. Obviously, that's why I'm here today.
Fantastic. And is that a fairly lengthy term in terms of like 7 years? Is that, or is that kind of average for, this type of public service?
So the councillors are elected generally for about 4 years. So I've been re-elected. I was elected in 2018 and then re-elected in 2022. And I suppose there are some people who do it for a very, very long time, and some people do it for much less time. I think there's a big difference in terms of age as well. So frequently, it's quite common, particularly in smaller towns, for it to be people who are retired who end up doing this after they've finished their working career. And obviously, then they maybe do it for 10, 15 years or something potentially. Whereas I think where I am, there's a lot more of us who are younger. There is a real range of ages, but there are a lot more younger councillors. And for them, it's much more likely that they kind of do it for a little while and then they move on. And sometimes leave London, move to a different part of London.
And let me just make sure that I'm getting the location correct. So if we pull up the map here and we take a look at where we're at, we see, here's London. We've got the London Bridge. Is it literally just south of the river there?
Yeah, so London is divided into 33 local authorities, 32 boroughs, and this funny thing called the City of London, which is very complicated and odd, but not for today. And Southwark is one of those. Southwark goes right up to the south, all south of the river. So its northern flank is the river, so it borders with the river, and it includes some famous spots like Tower Bridge, which is the most famous bridge in London, and London Bridge, which is not the most famous one. It actually looks very boring, but it's got the good name.
Exactly.
So we've got both of those. We've also got some fairly famous landmarks that people might be familiar with across the world, like the Tate Museum, which is the big modern art museum. We also have the Globe Theatre, which is the Shakespearean theatre, and we have what was it? Well, a whole range of different places around that kind of area in the north of the borough, and then we stretch really quite far south. So in terms of the transport policy, we have a very big motorway that goes around all of London called the M25, and then a smaller loop that goes around the kind of in the middle almost, a middle kind of level orbital called the North Circular and the South Circular. And Southwark actually stretches below the South Circular. So we go way further south than you can see on that map there. So Camberwell, which you can see on the map, is about halfway down our borough. If you can see that the Horniman Museum and Garden down there at the bottom of your screen, that is still in our borough. So that is, so it
Wow.
really does go quite a long way.
That is a
Um,
really,
so
really big borough. Yeah. And what's the population of your borough?
330,000. So it's bigger than
330,000.
most English cities.
And it's bigger than most. And so you hit my radar because of some posts out on social media. I believe it was LinkedIn about some of the work that you are doing with regards, and very similar to other boroughs there in London, that you're doing in terms of trying to traffic calm and create streets for people. And of course, I had to laugh because my tagline is "Streets are for people," and your tagline is "Streets for people." Talk a little bit about that, and include in there what made you so passionate about serving public service and this Streets for People.
Yeah, so I mean, I'll maybe talk a bit about the second bit first, then move on to the first bit about why I kind of got involved in this. So I've always been very politically engaged. I grew up in a household where we would talk about politics around the dinner table, that kind of thing. And when I got to university, I became politically active. Not through party politics, but through kind of protest and social movement. We had a very big kind of conflict with the government at the time around tuition fees, and obviously nothing to do with walking and cycling. But the thing that had in common is about justice, about social justice and economic justice, and that's kind of how I got involved. And then from there, when I graduated from university, I worked for a charity for a little while, then I became a teacher, and I still am a teacher. I still am a primary school teacher, although now that's a very small part of my week, whereas previously it was my full-time role. Now I tend to go there one or occasionally 2 days in a week. And I became a trade unionist as well. And all these kind of things were all about the same kind of values and drive for me, which was about creating a fairer world, creating a more just world. And it's through that I became involved in the Labour Party as well, the British Labour Party, Democratic Socialist Party. I sort of fell into being a councillor in 2018. And as I said before, I spent 4 years kind of representing my own little patch, but not really having kind of borough-wide responsibilities. So I do casework on behalf of people struggling with housing need, for instance. And I would be involved in discussions as a whole with the other 51 Labour councillors in my borough, but I didn't have any direct responsibility or leadership roles for the borough. That changed in 2022 when I took up a role in what's called the cabinet. So essentially the group of 10 people, the leader, the deputy leader, and 8 others who have effectively a full-time role. Some people do a little bit of other work on the side, and we split all the responsibility of the council between those 10. So, I'll have a colleague who's in charge of adult social care, a colleague in charge of children's social care and education, a colleague in charge of the climate emergency and businesses and town centres, another colleague in charge of urban regeneration, one in charge of housing, etc. And at that point, my responsibility was urban regeneration, so the planning process and zoning and these kinds of things. And we were in an interesting borough for that because maybe 20 or 30 years ago, people wouldn't consider Southwark to be in what we call inner London because there's been outer London. And now that's simply not the case. I mean, the kind of landmarks I spoke about at the beginning of the podcast are that anyone who knows London would see those as clearly central London locations, absolutely. And so the area kind of transformed, and that brought a lot of good things, but it also did kind of create tension, create conflict with the people who already live in these areas that were being regenerated. So one of the things I wanted to do in that brief was launch what we called a land commission. We brought together radical thinkers, landowners across the borough, and the community all together to say, how can we better use our land? And one of the things that came out of it, there's lots of things I could talk about on that aren't about transport, but one of the things that came out of that is how much land is publicly owned. Almost 50% of the land in our borough is owned by the state in some form. whether that's the UK government, whether that's Southwark Council, whether it's the Transport Authority, Transport for London, a range of other bodies. And we looked at that and thought, well, how can we use this land that we publicly own, we collectively own, for better use? We realised a lot of it's on the highway. And the first instinct there is, well, okay, well, that land's already being used. We can't reallocate that land because it's already being put to use for, for transport. And I thought, well, hang on a minute, is that right? Like, who is using this land? How is this land being used? And then very shortly after that, I took the transport brief. And I took that kind of idea of land justice into transport. I started by saying, okay, we own our highways. Our highways are publicly owned. Who's using them? The vast majority of that space is used for private motor vehicles. And the majority of our residents, the majority of the households in Southwark do not own a car. So we have something that's owned by everyone being used by a section, a minority of the population. And not only a minority, the people who tend to be wealthier, the people who own a car. Now, on a simple kind of economic justice level, that's wrong. So we took that kind of principle into Streets for People, which was the transport policy we were working on, which I was fortunate to be able to launch. And that was the key kind of thing that I brought into it, is reshaping about this position, this question of justice and use of space, use of land. And we said the big shift for us, which I think some other local authorities have done as well, is we started to explicitly say we need to take away space from cars. So up until that point, we sort of tried to talk about balance, tried to talk about how it's important that we have all different kind of road users able to use the space, which is of course true, but we have to start from the position that actually cars have already taken up way more than their fair share. So having that fair distribution means taking a lot of space away from cars and giving it to other uses, whether that's transport, walking, cycling, public transport, or indeed non-transport uses. The opportunity for children to play in the street, for adults to connect, for businesses to use it for their customers. And what was really, for me, really exciting and really important about that is that up until that point, people said, oh, the council has this secret anti-car agenda. And, when people will sort of say that, we say, no, we don't have an anti-car agenda and so on. At this point, I was able to, not quite so frankly, but effectively say, yes, we do. We do have an anti-car agenda. We think that too much space is devoted to cars. We're going to take some of that space away and use it for other things. And at that point, the activists, the motorist activists, sort of run out of things to say because you're just being upfront to say, yes, that's what we believe. That is what we're trying to do.
Yeah. Well, and I like to say that, it's really not a war on cars as much as it is a war on car dependency and bringing things back into balance. We let things get way out of balance and prioritized the movement of cars over the priorities that we have here on screen, which is prioritizing people and, the ability to still be able to get to meaningful destinations by car is still there. It's still preserved. It's not completely eliminated. That's not the point. And so it really is about trying to deliver on the priorities of, serving the people. And further down on this particular document, we have a good depiction of, in fact, that long, sort of almost triangular shape there of the borough. Again, the top side there, the north edge of it is where the river is. But we've got the walking network here, and then we also have the cycling network and the bus routes that identified here within the borough. That is really, really fascinating. And so really a lot of this came about during that period of time since you were elected in 2022. You're just coming off of the lockdown of the pandemic. You were, serving in that other role. Did you see some low traffic network and low traffic neighborhood installations and Streets for People installations during the actual lockdown, during the pandemic, or some of them were in place even before that?
Yes, no, we did. So, sorry, I don't want to overstate my role in this. Certainly we were doing exciting things before I took up this post. So in the COVID period, the rules were changed temporarily, and it was possible for local authorities to make quite big changes in the street space to remove traffic, remove motor vehicles from roads to make it easier to walk and cycle, and also to social distance, which obviously is something we don't think about anymore. But at the time, that was quite important as well. So much wider pavement for social distancing. Actually, some of those innovations are still very
Five
helpful
years
today.
ago, 5 years ago, this week, this month, is when everything came
Absolutely,
down.
yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
So we did. I think at that point we made a bit of a leap forward. We started doing innovative things we hadn't done before, and I think kind of what I've essentially done is try to formalize that in our strategy to try and do some of these things in a more kind of consistent way throughout our general work. So for me, the big shift is away from protecting walk pedestrians and cyclists from traffic towards reducing traffic. So obviously there are still occasions on busy main roads where those protections are important. So I'm thinking segregated cycle lanes, really good signalized crossings for pedestrians. These things are of course important. But on your neighborhood streets, those things shouldn't be necessary because you should not have enough traffic to merit them. But that only happens if you put in measures to reduce the traffic.
Yeah. There's a couple images here from a car-free day. Give a little context and background, and we'll play this little video that we have on queued up here in just a little bit. What was this car-free day all about?
So we've tried to make each car-free day bigger than the last. This is last year's car-free day, and we allowed residents or encourage residents from across the whole borough to put forward their street consideration in one of two things, either a play street or a street party. And the two are pretty similar, but different in some ways. So a play street is where the road is closed off and children are encouraged to play in the street, and resources are provided for them to be able to do that. And that would normally be for about half a day or something. Or a street party is where it's closed up for the same reason, and they can use that for a longer period of time, throughout probably the whole day, sometimes even with the preparation time included, it's about slightly over a day. And that can be used to, I think the case in the image preceding was to raise money for a community centre, for instance. So it's about taking this publicly owned space that we all own collectively and being able to use it for this range of different things, whether it's children playing or whether it's bringing the community together.
Interesting. We have a couple of images that are before and after. I'll start with this set here and kind of walk us through what this transformation was all about.
So this is labeled as the before, but actually in reality, this is partway through the process, because what you have there is you have a normal street designed for cars to go down, as you can kind of see, but there's two punters put in the way. Those punters were, I'm pretty sure, a COVID legacy. So during COVID, this road was closed temporarily. Those punters were, very, very cheap, very easy to put in. You put them in, and then all of a sudden you transformed that street. And that was really important for connecting up. So that was just one example, but it's part of a wider network that connected all sorts of different streets and residences to the local parks, the local schools. And then if you want to look at the next image, then this is what we did afterwards. So we had made, essentially, the traffic movements haven't changed, but once those planters went in, that became streets that cars couldn't access. And then we redesigned it in this way, which I hope you'd agree, looks much nicer. And it's designed very clearly with a cycle lane down the middle, bi-directional cycle lane, with no cars at all, and very nice wide pavements on either side for pedestrians.
Fascinating. Yeah. What a beautiful installation that this really is. And you can see the difference between the pavements, the sidewalks, as we call them here in the United States, much more constrained on this side. And then when you go over to the after picture, the pavements have really increased, plus you have some planting of some street trees, and so you have a little bit of depaving that has happened here too. So from a sustainability perspective, you're also bringing some of that heat island effect down. You see the pavements have been done in lighter stones, again helping decrease the heat island effect. Really, really well done. Beautiful. How well was this received by, the local community? Was this something that once it was in and they got used to it, became quite enthusiastic about it, and more areas saying, we want more of this?
Yeah, so it's interesting. There were two very big, we did lots of small schemes during COVID, but there are two very big ones that we did. One was this, which is, as I say, not just this road, but this network of roads, which is in an area called Walworth. And then we did something else in an area called Dulwich Village. And the interesting thing is the difference in demographics between the two. So Walworth is a relatively low income neighbourhood. It's very ethnically diverse and it has very low car ownership, but very high air pollution. So as a result, the people living there obviously is a variety of views, but for them, traffic is something that comes from outside of their neighbourhood, goes through their neighbourhood, and leaves the pollution behind. So it's not a positive thing for them overall. There are a range of views, of course. So when this came in, there was some controversy about it. Absolutely, sometimes change can be quite a scary thing, and particularly around issues like loss of parking and this kind of thing. So there was some concern raised, but it quickly dissipated. But people saw what an amazing impact it was having. At the other end of the spectrum, this other part of the borough is Dulwich Village. So this is much leafier, but much further south. It's very wide streets, much bigger houses. It's the whitest and most affluent part of our borough. And there you have a very, very mobilized group of people who are really in favour of these measures, who really want to be able to walk and cycle with their kids to school. But you also have a very mobilized group of people who want to be able to drive through these areas. So that essentially created quite a lot of conflict, really for some time. But was I think the key difference really is in these areas, if people are used to driving and they own cars themselves, they're going to find it more difficult to kind of get used to these changes than if they don't. So that's why, in general, we're trying to prioritize places with lower car ownership. We think that's kind of more socially just. But at the same time, very aware there's people living in these areas with high car ownership who want to do the right thing, and we need to support them to do that as well.
Got it. Now, relatively speaking, is this further to the north, or is this further to the south in the more leafy neighborhoods that you were just referring to?
That's fairly near the centre, but I guess probably in terms of what I was saying there, more south. That's
Okay.
Yeah.
All right, let's press play.
Having a car-free street means that we can let all the kids out to play safely, and so that the neighbours can come out and have a chat, and we can all enjoy catching up with each other and being in each other's company. The kids really love it. They find it all a bit of a novelty to be allowed to play on the road, and it's just a really nice excuse to catch up with our friends and neighbours.
It's really, really interesting, too, because there's this pent-up demand and need, I think, within our communities, and this is globally, that when a street is sort of, closed down to the high volumes and high speed motor vehicle traffic and turned back over to people, there's just like this inherent glee that comes from being able to reoccupy the space. And the reason why I phrased my little mantra of streets are for people is really dating back to the fact that, before the automobile, that's literally where we gathered. It was the largest public space that we had in our public realm. So I really do believe that there's that pent up demand and need for, coming together as people, in this common area that over the last 80 to 100 years, just, increasingly became exclusive to the movement of big metal boxes on rubber wheels.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I heard recently that initially it was illegal to park your car on the highway, just because it's your private property and you don't just leave your private property in public space. But over time, that was undermined and it became normal, and now that is the case. But I think it is something worth questioning. Like, why is it that we do allow people to do that? I mean, I'm not saying we can overturn that overnight, but the idea that this public space isn't allocated to all of us to use, like in a collaborative way, but is instead storage space or a transfer place for people in their private property is quite odd, really. And as you say, what's interesting is when you challenge that and you try and take that space back. At first, sometimes people don't like it. At first, it's controversial, but as time goes on, people almost never want it to go back to how it was before.
Right. Right. On screen now, we, especially for the listening audience, we will describe this a little bit. We have a sign that says pedestrian and cycle zone, and then there's a red circle here, and then there's some time parameters to this. Walk us through what this particular installation is all about.
So this is what we call a school street. So as well as the permanent 24-hour day traffic changes that we talked about a moment ago, we have across the borough tried to introduce school streets in every school that wants them, so long as they're in a place where it's possible. So it's not possible on very busy main roads. Essentially, what that means is for maybe 2 hours a day or something roughly equivalent to that, half in the morning, half in the afternoon, around the time where children are either arriving or leaving school, no cars are allowed there. And so essentially what that does is it means that it's a much safer environment for children to come out of their school, to walk, cycle home, or indeed actually to get picked up from, if they are in a car, they just have to walk, around the block first, so there's cars on all waiting there. And it also is a way of tackling air quality as well, because you don't have parents sitting in their vehicles idling with the engine running and the fumes kind of coming out. What we found with these school streets is that they are much less controversial. People generally kind of accept the logic to having these kind of safe havens around schools. And as a result, we're kind of doing them as much as we can in as many places as we can.
I'm glad you mentioned it and phrased it in that way. Do you get the sense, based on your experience, that this is like a way to prime the pump, so to speak, for communities to be able to accept the expansion of low traffic neighborhoods and slower streets in general when you sort of get a foothold in front of those schools, that, since that's like a critical area to bring motor vehicle traffic down, speeds down, maybe even, prevent them permanently. Do you think that helps get the momentum to then be able to spread this? I don't want to say like a virus, but yeah, what the heck? We're 5 years out from the coronavirus. So, but you know what I mean, is like, it kind of gets some virality to it. And people are like, yeah, this is catching on. They did it in front of the streets, in front of the schools there. And gosh, we've got this neighborhood area that doesn't necessarily have a school, but it's got parks, it's got, really nice cafes and restaurants. This should be also a low traffic area. Do you get the sense that this is kind of like a step process? Start with the schools and then start getting other strategic areas to slow traffic down?
Yeah, I think it's right. So it's a very constrained area just around the school, and it's a very constrained amount of time. But I think both the amount of time and the amount of space can expand once you've proven the concept. If people living on the streets around sort of feel, hang on a minute, for 2 hours a day, every day, my street is really lovely, and then the rest of the time it's not so good, the logical conclusion is quite obvious, isn't it? You should expand that to be a permanent change. Ditto. What then happens with the parents is sometimes they say, well, actually, it is now really safe to do the last 200 or 300 meters to the school. What about the rest of my route? How else I have to cross a busy road. There's a lot of traffic. It's quite an unpleasant place to walk. I can't hear my child because all the cars driving past. And then so what you then build you start with a school street, and then you start talking about safe routes to school. And that kind of expands beyond that. You start looking at whole neighborhoods. So it is a good way, I think, of testing the water in terms of what people are interested in doing. Obviously, we live in a democratic environment, and it's very important to kind of win people over to these arguments, to do them outright. And the school street is proof of concept, because people, when you kind of, if you just put out a plan with a map and say you won't be able to drive here, you currently drive here and you won't be able to, people's reaction might be, well, they don't want that, because that seems like a negative. Once they see the impact, and particularly the impact for the children, the case is made.
Yeah. This is another type of installation here, just kind of observing what I'm seeing here. It looks like this was a quick build raised crossing here at the crosswalk. What else can you tell us about this particular installation of the Streets for People program?
Yes, this is part of a wider network of changes in one area, and it's also in Walworth, in fact, I think. And you can see that not only is it a raised table, we call it a raised table for the crossing, it's also expanded the pavement as well.
Yeah, yeah, you can see the pavement is done, and by doing that, it makes a shorter crossing too. Yeah.
Absolutely. It's a shorter crossing, it's a better crossing for the pedestrians, and also it helps contribute towards the traffic calming as well because it's a narrower lane for the vehicles.
Yeah, I love it. I love it. I want to pull up another before and after that caught my attention. It was quite nice, and then I want to play a little video from a young tyke that is talking about walking to school. But let's pull this up. This is the Windsor Walk, and this is the before picture. Go ahead and describe what we're looking at, especially for those people who might just be listening to this podcast episode.
Sure. So this is, again, like before, it's the before photo, but actually it's part of the way down. Because what you have is you have a road that has enough space for 2 lanes of traffic, and it's got double yellow lines up both ways for no parking, and it's actually on a bridge. On the left-hand side, you can kind of see the edge of the bridge. It goes over a railway. And on the right-hand side is what used to be one of the entrances to the railway, but is now an entrance to a pub and restaurant, which is in the building of the railway station.
Nice. I love it.
And so as I say, this is not quite before, this is kind of partway through. You can see that there are parasols, so coverings in the middle of the road. And what essentially has happened is they've expanded the space that the pub slash restaurant is able to use. So you can't see the tables. There you go, it's more clear now. So in that space, they applied for a license to expand the tables out into the carriageway, essentially, out into the road. So that road ceased, it was technically still road, but in terms of traffic management, you weren't allowed to drive down anymore because pub tables were there. That again was something that happened during COVID. And then this after picture we have now is the space that was previously carriageway, but with a lot of tables, is now footway. It's similar kind of paving, very light colour. There's plenty of space now, both for pedestrians to walk through, but also for that local business to spill out into that space and improve their custom. And then on the other side, there's now a cycle lane. So again, a bi-directional cycle lane, no access for private motor vehicles at all, just for cyclists. So again, what we've done there really exactly, it's a good example of the exact principle we're applying, is we did have a lot of space that was designed just for cars. We've taken all of that space away from cars and we've allocated it to better space for pedestrians, better space for cyclists, and better space for that business. Everyone's a winner.
I love this too, because we're not only have we expanded the public realm, the opportunity for pedestrians to have a nice, comfortable space. As you mentioned, we're using lighter materials on the pavements there, again, bringing that heat island effect down, which is critical during the summer months. When I was there, it was, there were some days that were quite warm. But at the same time, we're maintaining mobility options, for people on bikes, for individuals who might be in mobility devices, wheelchairs, and adaptive cycles. If they have disabilities, but they are able to use an adaptive cycle, they can still get through here. So you maintain the transport side of it, but at the same time, you're creating a delightful environment, and since you don't have the exhaust and the noise of motor vehicles rolling through here, it can be a pleasant experience for that pub that is reusing that old space from the railway. This is brilliant.
Absolutely.
Fantastic stuff. And again, kind of going back to what we touched upon earlier in the very, very beginning, is change is difficult. And so we do get pushback whenever there's a change to our public realm, and being empathetic to individuals who have become used to driving everywhere for everything and the habit of just getting in your car and going. It almost seems like a personal assault to them. How have you, as a borough and as a city, how have you guys been like navigating that? Because I know it can be difficult sometimes. It seems like you may be getting momentum and things are happening and everybody's like, oh, this is really cool, more, more, more. And then you push a little bit and it's like, oh no, we pushed too far and now we're getting massive resistance. And unfortunately it gets turned into culture war issues and all that kind of stuff. How are you guys, any lessons learned and any wisdom that you can pass along? Because this is the challenge that's happening globally. This isn't, anything that's just, the UK and isn't just, the United States. I mean, we are experiencing this globally. So any wisdom that you guys might have from, the bumps and bruises that you all have, sort of endured.
Absolutely. I think for me, the important thing to remember in all of this is when you're trying to introduce something that is more equal and more fair, the people who privilege benefited from the unequal system will experience that as unfairness. They'll experience that as oppression, when in reality it is equality. And I think that's really important to remember in terms of what kind of questions, what kind of consultation you want to do. So I think in the past, have got really bogged down with kind of endlessly fighting the same battle over and over again. And so when I inherited the brief I currently have, we had a draft of Streets for People, our transport strategy, and the plan was that I would finish it off and then we'd go to consultation. We consult on it for a few months, and then we would come back and edit it and amend it in response to consultation. Obviously, consultation is useful. It can improve the work that we're doing. But I took the view that, well, actually, this is only setting out our principles. And we know what our principles should be. We've had endless consultation in the past with residents. We also have an electoral mandate for the political party I represent. So we're not going to consult on the principles. We're going to go out and say, this is our approach. This is what we believe. And instead, we're going to use that resource we would have spent on consulting on the strategy instead of consulting people on something much more tangible. What do you want on your street? So we went out and asked that simple question, and it was the biggest consultation the council has ever done. We got 9,000 responses, so quite a big chunk of our population. We did workshops in schools. I think actually you have some footage of that. We spoke to children about what they want on their streets. We talked to community groups about what they want. And overwhelmingly, what they wanted were things that were either explicitly traffic reduction or things that came from traffic reduction. So the example there, less pollution, or some people might say more bike storage, or they might say wider pavements, or they might say more greening, more trees, more crossings, more to do for flood alleviation. All of these kinds of things, which inevitably mean taking away space from cars for these other purposes, because we don't have unlimited space. And that, for me, was such an important way of doing it, because we now have this wealth of data for every single street in our borough of what it is that people want to happen there. And overwhelmingly, it backs up exactly what we thought from the beginning, that people do want streets for people.
Right, yeah. When you do get that pushback and you start to wonder, it's like, oh, did we miscalculate here? Do you have a strategy of saying, okay, don't overreact. Let's get it in. Let's give it a chance to percolate. Let's give people a chance to actually feel this. Any strategies for being able to weather that storm? Because it can be kind of challenging when the hatred starts heading towards your way and you're like, oh my gosh, we miscalculated here. Do you try to stay firm, or does it make sense to retrench and pull it out and try a different location?
So I think this is maybe a bit of a fudgy of an answer, so maybe it's kind of cheating, but I think it is a bit of both. I think you've got to be very discerning about what people are saying and what they actually mean by what they're saying. So if they're essentially saying that, so one thing that I find quite interesting is we will say things like, we will introduce a low traffic neighbourhood, which then means that the cycle route to school is very quick and very safe, and the car route to school is now much longer. And, people come to me and say, I used to be able to drive my son to school in 5 minutes. Now it takes me 20 minutes. So you need to take this out. And for me, the point there is, well, they're not complaining about a bug in the system. They're complaining about the point of the system. That's a feature.
Right.
So when it comes to concerns like that, we sort of do have to say, well, we disagree. That's not the purpose of this is to do what you're complaining about. I'm sorry that you don't like that, but that is what we're aiming to do. And all humans have conflicting opinions. That's very, very normal. That's, people want lower pollution, but they may also want to drive their car everywhere. We can't achieve both. So we need to kind of make some of these decisions. So I don't believe that we should, put everything to a referendum. And then linked to that is once people experience it, their views change. And that can be really hard to remember that in the midst of it when everyone's complaining about it.
Right.
But
Yeah.
1 or 2 years later, people will be happy with it. And it reminds me of that quote by Henry Ford, where he said, if he'd asked the customers what they wanted, they would have said a faster horse. And, and that's essentially, but now obviously people don't want to go back to having a horse, do they? So I think we just need to kind of have that vision and be willing to stick to it. However, we do also, this is where I'm kind of fudging it a bit, we do also need to take the consultation seriously when it's not about the principle of the scheme. So if someone points out, hang on a minute, did you realize that what you're doing here means that actually now this cycle crossing is quite unsafe? Then absolutely, it's really useful to kind of take these things on board. Or indeed, some elements of our car use. I'm not suggesting we need to be completely dogmatic about car use, particularly in terms of the businesses and the loading. So I'm pretty sympathetic to a business saying, well, hey, my shop sells bathroom furniture, sinks and toilets and so on. We do need people to be able to load outside the shop. Can you make sure the loading bay there? Yeah, sure. I don't expect people to cycle with a baffle in the back of their bike. That's fine.
Yeah. I think it's really important. I think for leaders around the world to understand that yes, this may not be popular with everybody, but learn what you can from the feedback. If things need to be tweaked a little bit, tweak them. Like you said, if there's some dangerous little niggles that need to be addressed, address them. But for the most part, stand firm. You're doing this for good reasons because of those priorities that we were looking at earlier. It's really important to make streets safer for all ages and all abilities, all modes. And so again, as we said earlier, it's not a war on cars and it's not a war on car drivers. It's a battle that we're fighting towards car dependency, and that being the only viable way to get around. I want to play this little video as sort of like a little success story. It's of a child who's really excited about being able to walk to school. So let's hit play on this and enjoy what we have to learn here.
My name is Hal. I like walking to school as a family because then it gives us a nice chance to connect instead of just walking to school on my own, and we really enjoy doing things like spotting nature.
I really like walking to school with Hal because we get to have a good chat. We enjoy walking through the park. It's a really nice way to start the day and to finish the day, to discuss what's coming up or what's kind of happened. Sometimes we might spend a little bit longer in the park after school when the weather's nice, and it's really nice to kind of hang out together, sometimes even with some of his friends.
And it's a quick way to get to school without using a car.
Gotta love it. And globally, I mean, this was normal. This is how kids got to school, 40, 50, 60 years ago. I mean, the majority of children actually got to their schools by walking and some by biking. In the United States, it's gotten just ridiculously bad in terms of the low number of kids being even able to walk to school. And I think it's something that we've just lost touch with. And so this is like really, really wonderful when you can hear it from a child's perspective and in their voice as to why this matters. I mean, it gives us hope.
Absolutely. I think pretty much any child, given the choice between driving to school or walking to school, will choose walking to school. I think often that part of the day is the opportunity they have to speak with their carer, their parent, And, obviously you can do that in a car, but it's a very different experience to be able to explore the world around you, to, reflect on the nature, go through the nice park, stop for a little while to play on swings, these kinds of things. I mean, these are absolutely, I think, what most children want to do. And to kind of link back to what you're saying about it's not a war on cars, I think most parents want to do that as well. And it's not a failure on their part that they're not doing that. It's a failure on our part collectively that we're not building a transport system and a society that makes that easy. We've made it far too easy to drive. We made it far too difficult to do everything else. And that's the thing we need to challenge.
And I think it's also worth emphasizing too that there's a great deal of fun that can be had for kids to be able to get out on bikes and get to meaningful destinations. It could be with family to go out and do something enjoyable and pleasurable that would be considered more of a leisure ride, but also being able to get to meaningful destinations like to school or to a friend's house or who knows, maybe on summer break, a place where you can take a dip and go for a swim or have some fun together. Talk a little bit about that, because I think it's really important to understand that a big part of what has changed in our car dependency mode that we have evolved into is we took a lot of freedom away from children of being able to roam within their communities.
Absolutely. I mean, a bike opens the opportunities for the places you can go so dramatically, but they're completely closed off if the roads around you are too unsafe to cycle on. So the approach that we've taken, to that is twofold. Firstly, try and improve streets, which we've talked about a lot. We do a huge amount of work with children directly. We very much see that as being, in the long term, the kind of most important, most valuable approach. So we provide training in schools so children feel confident on the roads. But the other thing we started doing, which I think we're fairly unique in London, is that we run workshops for fixing your bike as well. So what we found is often for all people of all ages, but especially children, if their bike breaks and they don't have the money to take it to a bike maintenance shop, which can often be quite expensive, that's sort of the end of it. They may not pick up their bike again for a very long time, if ever even. So what we've found is that we go into schools and we partner up with a group called Community Cycle Works and go into schools and teach children how to fix a bike, how to do, I'm not saying it too complicated stuff, but, changing tires, fixing tires, some work around like being able to check gears and brakes and that kind of thing. And what's really interesting about that is even the children who don't cycle absolutely love it. So it's not just about supporting the kids who already cycle to keep their bike in good nick. It actually is a way of getting other children interested in cycling as well. But you don't need to be able to cycle to be able to change a tire. But it's a very different experience to what they normally do in school.
Yeah. Is there anything that we haven't discussed yet that you think the audience would really, really benefit from knowing about, your borough and the Streets for People, movement and the initiatives that you guys are working on?
I guess the one thing that I think is really important for us in terms of Streets for People, and actually it really comes out particularly in our cycling plan, which sort of sits underneath Streets for People as this cycling specific bit. I think in the past, we've started from the position that we want to carve out little bits of the road that are safe and appropriate for pedestrians and cyclists. And obviously that's better than not doing it at all, but that is taking crumbs from the table. We should be looking at the whole cake. And an example I give of that is in our cycling plan, the first draft of it said we had a hierarchy of roads. So the ideal road is what's called a greenway. So essentially that's completely no motor traffic whatsoever. We don't really have many of those in Southwark, to be honest. Second is a segregated cycle lane. So alongside the main road, but just cycles only. Third is a cycleway on the carriageway. And then last is just shared with the motor traffic. So that was kind of the hierarchy. And I was saying we kind of want to get to the top of having these segregated spaces. And we then turned that completely upside down. We said, actually, you know what? What we're saying there is the best case scenario is we get our own little bit where it's safe to walk and cycle. Actually, it should be the other way around. Let's start by saying the best case scenario is you have access to the whole carriageway and traffic is so low and so slow that it's completely safe. Only when you can't do that do you go for segregated cycleways and so on. And I appreciate, obviously, in some very busy roads, that's necessary. And, I'm very committed to segregated cycle lanes in those cases. But that is a last resort. The first resort is take the traffic out, remove the traffic as much as possible, because that's in terms of cost effectiveness and in terms of impact, by far the best. It benefits pedestrians, it benefits cyclists, it benefits children who want to play and connect. And it's all done without having to put huge amounts of money into changing the street space.
Yeah. And, we've got the cycle network up here on screen and off to the left here. And I really appreciate you framing that the way that you did in terms of identifying the fact that we have so much potential in these quiet, low traffic, low speed streets that typically don't show up on cycle networks. It's like the cycle network map, of a typical city is, this is where we have our bike lanes. This is where we have our segregated and separated pathways and routes. And then you're like, wait, all of these delightful, quiet, low speed, connected, potential cycle routes are almost always, even unidentified. And so I love it when cities start embracing the fact that, hey, these low traffic streets that, have low motor vehicle speeds and, can be traffic calm just a little bit, maybe some traffic diversion here and there. And then these cut throughs, like we saw earlier, the mobility modal filters of being able to get, through, just like the one past the little pub there, where you're able to get to the next level. You can't drive through there, but somebody on a bike can get there. Somebody in a wheelchair can get through. And so it's really, really important to lean into the fact that you can actually have safe routes for all ages and abilities to all destinations when you start to embrace a broader view of what is part of the cycle network.
Absolutely. And I think it also links to what kind of journeys are we talking about and for who. I think the kind of segregated cycle lanes are really great if you're thinking about people commuting, for instance, going from one place to another. They get to the main road, they whiz down the main road, off they go. And that's fine, that's good. That's obviously more likely to be men than women, more likely to certain ages, certainly not very helpful for children. But actually, it's those neighborhood connections around the small side streets. They're the things that connect you from your house to your primary school, which is great if you're a child, great if you're your mother. It's the kind of the short walks that older people are going to be making when they kind of want to go shopping and so on. These are a much wider audience of people want those kinds of routes that let them kind of get around in their own streets, as opposed to the kind of arterial routes that are along the main road.
Fantastic. One of the other things that we've touched upon a couple of different times is that emphasis on trying to decrease the heat island effect and trying to integrate, maybe do some deep paving and bringing some greener environments into the street space. Talk a little bit about this particular initiative that you guys are working on here.
Yeah, so I have to say this is probably an area that we could be doing more on. I think there's the sky's the limit really with this. We do have commitments to, actually can't remember the statistic off the top of my head. We've got a statistic to turn a certain amount of highway space into greening of some kind. So that can either be new trees and shrubbery, which helps to clean the air, or indeed to affect the heat island, but also sustainable urban drainage systems as well, which is dealing with the fact that in Southwark, quite a huge proportion of our land mass is at flooding risk, and the flood risk areas tend also to be the more disadvantaged areas, the lower income areas. So we've got a commitment that every time we do any of these schemes, we will try to depave to some extent, add greening, and add flood resistance.
Love it. I love it. Yeah, I think that, these types of initiatives really work hand in hand with, being able to encourage more people to walk and bike to meaningful destinations, because it all also goes hand in hand with creating more enjoyable environments. If you're surrounded by some trees and you have less of that heat island effect happening there, it's like, oh, this is pleasant, I want to be here. It helps with that habit formation of getting people used to walking and biking to places because it was comfortable while doing it. And who knows, maybe during the right season, maybe you're also smelling some great flowers and seeing some really cool stuff.
Absolutely, yeah.
Cllr James McAsh, thank you so very much for joining me on the Active Towns podcast. This has been so much fun. Hey, congratulations on all the success that you all are having. Keep up the good work, and I look forward to visiting you in person one of these days soon. Again, thank you so much for joining me on the Active Towns podcast.
Thank you so much.
Hey, thank you all so much for tuning in. I hope you enjoyed this episode with Cllr James McAsh. And if you did, please give it a thumbs up, leave a comment down below, and share it with a friend. And if you haven't done so already, be honored to have you subscribe to the channel. Just click on the subscription button down below and ring that notifications bell. And again, if you're enjoying this content here on the Active Towns channel, please consider supporting my efforts by becoming an Active Towns ambassador. Again, super easy to do. Just navigate over to activetowns.org, click on the support tab at the top of the page, and there's several different options. You can make a donation to the nonprofit. You can leave me a tip right here on YouTube, right down below, as well as becoming an Active Towns Patreon supporter. The patrons do get access to all this video content early and ad-free. Again, thank you so much for tuning in. I really do appreciate it. And until next time, this is John signing off by wishing you much activity, health, and happiness. Cheers. And a huge shout out to all my Active Towns ambassadors supporting the channel via YouTube Super Thanks, Buy Me a Coffee, Patreon, as well as making contributions to the nonprofit. I could not do this without you. Thank you all so very much.